Welcome to the Florida Divorce Podcast, your source for the information you need to successfully get through your divorce and into the next exciting chapter of life. Now, here's your host, Attorney Scott Kalish.
Hey everyone, this is Attorney Scott Kalish. I am a divorce and family law attorney here in South Florida. Today I want to talk to you about the costs of divorce, and I want to give you an idea of what you can expect to an extent to spend in a divorce case. Obviously, the difference in cases really varies wildly, right? And one person can spend maybe a few $1,000s, couple $1,000s, and another person can spend over $100,000 or even more than that, obviously depending upon the complexity of the case, right? So let's jump right into it and let's talk about, how much you might spend in divorce and the factors that influence that. So let me start with the easy stuff, right? Figures that really is the same for nearly everybody, and that is court costs, right? So in order to file for divorce, you have to pay a filing fee. And in Florida, the filing fees in the counties are approximately $420 once all of the service fees are paid, like the online fees and all of that. So it's like $406, and then after they add their extra little fees, it comes out to about $420. There is an exception for people that are indigent, right? If you qualify as indigent, and the clerk's office has a form you're able to fill out. There is a waiver of that at times, right? The clerk has to look at your assets, your income, and all of that. And the clerk of court has the discretion to totally waive that fee for people that, cannot afford it, right? So that happens from time to time. People fill out that form and their fees end up getting waived. The other cost that's pretty standard across the board is the cost of service. Now, serving your spouse typically is about, I would say, $50. That's probably the average fee that most process servers charge to have your spouse served. If you're in a situation where your spouse and yourself are more agreeable and the situation's amicable, right? They might agree to just waive that so you don't have to, spend that money to serve your husband or your wife. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Those two items are pretty standard across the board. So let's go into attorney's fees. This is obviously going to be the substantial bulk of how much you're going to end up spending during the case. So let's sort of start out with how attorneys are typically paid or how they charge. So typically, I would say 90-something% of family law attorneys charge by the hour, right? And their hourly rate can really vary wildly. I would say probably from about $200, that's probably one of your lowest hourly rates you're going to find out there, to, probably, the highest paid family law attorneys, I would say, are probably in the neighborhood of $600 and something, probably an hour, and then everything in between. So most family law attorneys charge by the hour. There are some family law attorneys, right, that are getting into charging flat fees for certain things. Now, it's very rare to find a family law attorney that's going to charge a couple $1,000s for the entire case, no matter how complex it is. Obviously, if you have one attorney, that charges by the hour, and another attorney that charges, flat fee, you really got to just be careful and know exactly what is included in that flat fee, because one of two things can be happening, right? You could have an attorney that is grossly incompetent, maybe, right? And doesn't know, all of the work that has to go into a case like yours, for instance, if it's very complex and if they're only charging you a couple $1,000s for the entire thing, I would be very scared, because sometimes hours and hours and hours of attorney time has to go into it. And I guarantee you they're not going to put hours and hours and hours into it if they're only charging a couple $1,000s. So just be careful with that. So that's sort of, the fee structures typically, but there are, attorneys that charge flat fees, but there's different packages, right? Like they might say, hey, from the filing to the mediation, we'll charge you $5,000. If we have to go to a court hearing, it's going to be $2,000, and then kind of piecemeal it out so you always know what you're going to be spending, right? That's okay. I mean, I feel like that's pretty reasonable. But, for, like I said before, an attorney that's going to charge you $2,000, let's say, to do the whole entire thing, and you have a very complex, very difficult case, I would be very scared if I was you. So let's kind of, go into the factors, and let's talk about what influences the attorney's bill, right? What influences how much you're going to end up spending in attorney's fees, right? So I mentioned this, a few moments ago, but the complexity of the case. Are we talking about a very complex case where the parties have millions of dollars and there's several businesses that have to be, valued, and there's monies that have to be traced? On the other hand, if we're not talking finances, do we have children? Do the children have issues with the parents, right? Do the parents have issues themselves, like mental health issues? Do we need to get psychologists involved? All of that. That's obviously complex and adds to the complexity. And the more complex, the more hours have to be spent, the more events that have to be attended, right? Depositions, court hearings. So that obviously can drastically affect the bill. I would say, and how much attorney's fees end up being incurred. Also, I would say, the emotional level of both parties. Are both parties, both husband and wife extremely emotional? Or is one extremely emotional, right? I mean, is it going to take months and almost a year or more than a year to come to an agreement on basics, right? I've seen that too, where, the case is very straightforward, but they're both very, very emotional over everything, or one's very emotional over almost everything, and it's virtually impossible to get a deal hammered out, right? So that could definitely affect the attorney's bill because we're going back and forth over small items that are pretty simple. On the other hand, you can have a very, very simple case where the finances are straightforward, the children are straightforward, both parties are not emotional, towards their attorneys, right? So maybe they keep that sort of to themselves and at home, and the attorneys are able to hammer out an agreement, relatively, quickly, right? So that's the other end of the spectrum here. Obviously, it's going to be a lot less. I mentioned this a little bit before, experts, right? Experts can certainly, drastically increase the bill. Are we getting court psychologists involved? Psychologists that are going to end up testifying in court? Are we hiring a vocational expert and doing a vocational evaluation, right? That means comes into play when one party either is not employed and the other party thinks that they could make a lot more money, out in the workforce, or if they're just underemployed and they think that they could be bringing home way more money than they are. Then you have an expert come in and do what's called a vocational evaluation and determine, what can this person truly make and what opportunities are out there for this person to seize, right? And to start working. That obviously is going to cost money. And, when you have experts involved, the attorneys typically want to take depositions, right, of the experts, which is you have everybody, come to an office or meet on Zoom, and there's a court reporter that takes down what they're saying, and the other attorney is able to ask questions of your expert, or you're able to ask questions of your spouse's expert, right? And kind of see what they're going to testify to. So that can definitely take time and cause, attorney's fees to increase. Court appearances, right? Is your spouse doing things that cause you to file motions, right? Emergency motions, urgent motions to get back in court and fight for things, or possibly defend things? Is your spouse, coming after you with motions and does your attorney have to attend court hearings to defend you? Obviously, that's going to increase the bill too. The more time your attorney's spending on the case and spending in court and preparing for court, the higher the bill is going to be. So that's just natural. Also, like I mentioned before, like the issues that are going to be litigated, do you have an alimony claim or are you defending an alimony claim? Equitable distribution, the division of assets and debts, is that really complex? Do we have a bunch of stuff, but there's claims that some of the stuff is non-marital, right? But you're saying it's marital or the other way around. Obviously, that's going to increase the amount of time that's spent on the case. Child issues, like I kind of alluded to before, if one party is totally unfit and you're sticking to your guns and saying that they cannot spend time with the other, party, with the other spouse, if that's going to be a constant legal battle, then that's obviously going to cause attorney's fees to increase. So just, those are really what are the driving forces for attorneys' bills to increase. But like I said before, you could be on the total opposite end of the spectrum. You and your spouse can be totally amicable and have all of the terms pretty much hammered out. You just need to see attorneys to make it all formal and make sure everyone's protected, and to answer questions to make sure that you're grasping the entire case right, and you're able to proceed forward with getting the marital settlement agreement drafted and just end up, getting divorced, right? That can be your case too. But obviously, that's not everyone's case. There's a lot of cases in the system across Florida that are extremely contested and that cost a lot of money and a lot of time. So that's essentially what you need to know in terms of how much you're going to spend, right? That's what you should be keeping in mind when thinking about costs. Obviously, there's a ton of strategies that I can go over, possibly maybe in a future podcast, to talk about like the ways in which you can kind of keep costs down and the strategies you can take to keep costs down, emotionally and also legally, right? That you can latch on to make sure that you're not wasting your life savings on attorney's fees. Because I can tell you what, the end of the day, the judge is going to follow the law, and they're going to, make a decision that's based on the law. And if you and your spouse spoke to, two intelligent family law attorneys at the outset, I'm sure they're going to tell you pretty close to what a judge would end up doing. So you can get a sense of the position you should be taking, right, in your case, rather than, taking these nonsense positions that essentially cause extreme litigation that drain your savings and drain your income. So with that, I really appreciate you guys listening to the podcast. If you like it, please give it a 5-star review wherever you listen. I'd really appreciate that. If you have any questions at all whatsoever, don't hesitate. Email me. My email is scott@kjlawfla.com. Again, scott@kjlawfla.com. Thanks and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Florida Divorce Podcast. To learn the 10 secrets behind every successful divorce, visit floridadivorcepodcast.com. If you'd like Scott's help in your divorce case, go to kjlawfla.com.